After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, the German army in southern Russia had been forced to fall back in order to regroup, dig in, and stabilize the whole front. Gone was the notion of capturing a city named after the Russians' leader or rich oil fields in the Caucasus or Stalingrad. Hitler was now up against the Russian army, growing stronger by the day. Joseph Stalin, his nemesis, could draw from a giant human reservoir to fill his ranks. By contrast, the failed attacks of Moscow, Stalingrad, and in the Caucasus had cost Hitler nearly 2 million men, sapping over half of the strength in Russia. As a result, the call-up had been sounded in Germany for young men formerly exempt from military service, and for men up to 50 years and older, soldiers from the First World War now needed to fill out the ranks. Despite it all, Hitler yearned to go back to an offensive in Russia as soon as possible, hoping to seize the initiative and somehow turn things around. By the spring of 1943, he amassed 500,000 troops near Kursk, located in eastern Ukraine. Facing them was a single Russian force, twice as large, including the Red Army's most experienced troops, along with the same units who had been beaten the Germans in Stalingrad. Undaunted, Hitler eyed a daring plan for a blitzkrieg attack reminiscent of the early days of Operation Barbarossa, when huge Russian formations had been surprised by motorized German troops and tanks, then surrounded and captured. Called Operation Citadel, the new plan involved a two-pronged assault against the expansive Russian bulge in the lines west of Kursk. The German Ninth Army, led by General Kulguri, would attack from the north, while Field Marshal Manstein's 4th Panzer Army attacked from the south. The two armies would slice through the bulge, meet up in the middle at Kursk, then turn westwards and smash the now isolated Red Army units. But there was some big problems for Hitler at this point. First, the element of surprise was gone. The Russians were now watching Hitler's every move. They benefited enormously from the good intelligence, including the decoded messages by the Army High Command, passed on to them by the British, who had broken the Woolmeitzer secret cipher code. This meant that all of the radio instructions from the High Command of German field commanders at Kursk and elsewhere could be known by the Russians. The Germans had also misjudged the capacity and the quality of Russian war production. The Russians were now fully utilizing factories. They had relocated to the safety of the eastern Russia, beyond the range of Göring's Luftwaffe, or German Air Force. As a result of the wide-eyed German field commanders watched in amazement as fresh divisions steamed into battle alongside new powerful T-34 tanks, with sloped armor plating that caused German anti-tank shells to bounce off harmlessly. Moreover, the Germans found the Russians could produce huge numbers of tanks, along with the state-of-the-art war planes, top-notch artillery, and high-effective mobile rocket grenade launchers. Additionally, the Russian army staff in 1943 was a far cry from the disorganized rabble the Germans had nearly beaten 2 years earlier. Russian General Gregory Zhukov had not proven they were a match for Hitler's commanders. They had learned how to win. In the meantime, Stalin had learned to trust the judgment of Zhukov and other similarly successful Russian commanders. By contrast, Hitler had his hand in nearly all aspects of every decision, unwisely functioning both as the supreme commander of the German army and the responsibility for running the empire. And it was evident to those around him that he had taken too much. He was plainly worn out by the burden, and by the unimagined consequences of piloting the German army into a costly failure after another, ultimately endangering the very survival of his 1,000-year Reich. The magnitude of the stress had begun to show. Nazi politics in the old days had seen Hitler up to the top. Now they were shocked by his stooped, old facial appearance. He looked like a man in his 60s instead of 54, his actual age, with hands that trembled so badly sometimes that his teacup clattered loudly against the saucer plate. and now came the indecision. His generals knew, of course, that he didn't like to hear opinions, but they provided them with Hitler anyway. Mindful of the frontline soldiers, they had examined the Kursk scenario. They saw great danger and even suggested postponing the offensive altogether. This was prompted in a part by the crucial decision of the armaments deliveries, particularly in the new Tiger I super tanks, expected to outmatch and out-optimize the Russian T-34s. Beset by serious equipment delays, with still yearning to attack, Hitler couldn't decide whether or not to give the final go-ahead for Operation Citadel. The resulting day, eventually lasting 10 weeks, only made things worse, giving the Russians adequate time to perfect their defenses. This included 3 defensive rings around Kursk, miles of anti-tank ditches and traps, dense minefields, and barbed wire entanglements. The Russians also took the opportunity to increase their numerical advantage of men, tanks, planes, and artillery for the big showdown. Meanwhile, the Germans struggled to outfit 17 tank divisions by rushing newly built Panther and Tiger tanks straight from the assembly onto the battlefield. Even though the Tigers were largely untested in field conditions, still had unresolved mechanical flaws, and the German tank crews at Kursk were not trained in them. By late June, decision time had finally come for Hitler. Satisfied that sufficient equipment and troops were now in place, Hitler set Monday, July 5th, as the launch date for Operation Citadel. British intelligence, along with Russian spies, diligently tipped off Marshal Zhukov with the day and time of the attack. Zhukov reacted by beating Hitler to a punch via a massive artillery bombardment at 3:20 a.m. on July 5th, precisely 10 minutes before Citadel was scheduled to begin, therefore knocking the Germans offside during their opening moves. Nevertheless, the Germans pressed forward, and one of the largest battles in World War II now unfolded as 1.5 million soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and 4,000 planes crashed around Kursk. The original German plan to cut through the Russian bulge from the north and the south was a little success. Kogi's 9th Army only advanced 4 miles southward before it was bogged down by the effective anti-tank defenses, while Mansfield's 4th Panzer Army only got 8 miles to the north. The sweeping Barbarossa-styled armored movements that Hitler hoped for were proving impossible. Russian defenses were simply too strong. Additionally, the Tiger tanks proved mechanically unreliable on the battlefield, and a majority dropped out within the first few days. The Germans would therefore have to rely on their own smaller Panzer tanks, which they already knew were outgunned by the mighty Russian T-34s. The Germans were also relying on their Stuka dive bombers to help knock out the Russian tanks. But the slow-moving Stukas proved to be an easy target for the state-of-the-art Russian Stuma fighters, which soon gained air supremacy over the entire battlefield. As a result, the worst-case scenario for a German tank commander and infantrymen unveiled itself at Kursk. A battle of attrition, exactly what Hitler's general had feared the most, and exactly what the Russians wanted. Bold moves were needed to stave off the costly stalemate. And so Mansfield sent 3 Waffen SS tank divisions rolling southward on Sunday, July 11th, and 700 Panthers supposedly to probe for a weak spot behind the main Russian defenses. Purely by accident, they were met head-on with the reserve formations of 850 tanks from the Russian 5th Guards Tank Army. This resulted in a large single tank battle ever fought, as the two sides blasted away at each other at close range for 8 hours non-stop, just like jousting times and nights for the medieval days. There was no clear winner, and the tumultuous engagement on both sides gradually broke off. Then brought reinforcements just to maintain their positions. For Hitler, the outlook at Kursk was getting bleaker by the day. Continued fighting would only prolong the battle of attrition, which the numerically superior, well-supplied, and well-commanded Russians would surely win. Worse for Hitler, he was now confronted by staggering news elsewhere. British and American troops had landed on the island of Sicily, off the coast of Italy, opening a new front in the war. News of the invasion coming on top of the dismaying reports from Kursk, caused Hitler to call off Operation Citadel on July 13th. Thus far, the Kursk gamble had costed over 70,000 Germans, nearly 3,000 tanks, 1,400 planes lost would be inevitable. The Russians would be slightly higher, but they could regroup. In the coming operations, Germany would lose over 1 million men, and the Russians about 2 million. For the Russians, the Battle of Kursk was a major turning point in the war, and a great turning point in their nation's history. As long lasted, they had broken the back of the Russians in the German army in Russia, and could begin to expel Hitler's soldiers from the SS men from the motherland, and now would take the Third Reich was going down in defeat. Seizing the momentum, which they would never relinquish, the Russians began a general advance along a 1,000-mile front, pushing back the Germans at every turn. One by one, Russian cities were taken by the murderous Nazis, were retaken by the Red Army, including Oriel, Khavrolov, Smolensk, and Kiev. Observing the scope of the Nazis' devastation up close only intensifies the hatred for the individual Russian soldiers felt for the Germans as they ventured westwards in pursuit of Hitler's troops. The devastation worsened as the Germans withdrew while enacted a scorched earth policy and leaving absolutely nothing for Russians. Destroying bridges, railroads, crops, livestock, homes, and commercial buildings, they made sure nothing was around for the Russian army. This force would eventually make it all the way to Berlin, which would fall. Although they did not know it, the Battle of Kursk had been the death knell for the Nazi army during World War II. Hitler had poured everything he did into the attack, and now he had nothing left. This was the final and last push of Hitler's Third Reich in the East, and they had failed. This can arguably make Kursk one of the most important battles of the Second World War, and definitely in the Eastern Theater.